Podcasting with Ceri Jones.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's podcast. Before I jump into this week's chat with my guest, there's a little story I want to tell you which happened to me this week. Every now and again something happens in your fishing life which you ain't going to forget. And while fishing for bass on the local River Onkmo this week, I just certainly wasn't expecting for this to happen. The usual thing, because it's tidal down here, I fished the first 2 hours leading up to high tide, and then 2 hours after, when the tide is going back. Now, it was strange because I didn't see any notable fish. A few mullet coming in with the tide earlier, but not anything to excite me, so I didn't have no fish. So the 2 hours had gone after high tide, so I'd been there about 4 hours, not a sniff, nothing happened. And then I started to see a few fish coming back down the river, going back out to sea. So they were late coming back. You know, the river had almost dropped to its normal level now. And there was a shoal of these fish coming down, which I'm sure they were mallets. My setup was a floating line and a surf candy in the point. And it's like a ginger spider cross hare's ear pattern, which I've got on a size 12. And the idea of that is I'm hoping to catch maybe this attempt of the bass on the point fly and the chance of a mullet then on the dropper. So anyway, I could see these fish coming back down from my right, coming past me, going out to sea, you know. So then, and the stretch of river then is about 30 yards wide. And they were all in the far distance, the far bank. So I managed to put a good cast in amongst these fish. And then I just slowly, figure of eight, tightened as the arc was coming round. Before I started to pull, bang, I thought I'm on the bottom. Because nothing happened first of all, but as you strike, you look up at the tip of the rod, and I could see the knocking. It was a fish, and then he came straight towards me. The line went slack, so I stripped in the line, and cut a long story short, I've never had a fish run so erratically around the pool as this fish. I mean, like, it was like in a split second, it would go in off to 10, 15 yards, and then back the other way, zigzagging, and it was hard to keep track of it. But then when it was solid, when it stopped, I could feel the weight of the fish, and I know my fish. I know when there's a big fish on. You just know the difference to feel. So I knew this fish was double figure plus whatever it was. I'm thinking, is it a mullet? And as I thought it then, it started going, screaming the line. The line was at my feet. You know, like the line is sort of, it jumps up as the line's going through the rings, and you're trying your best to keep it as slack as possible, not for it to get snagged in the reel. I managed to do this. I never experienced this before. The fish run so fast, screamed off at all the line, the 30 yards, plus some backing. And I thought, right, I'm going to chase this fish. This fish is going back to the sea now. So I started legging it down the sand now. And I must have run sort of 30 yards again. And this fish just kept on going. And the next thing, inevitable happened. The line went slack, it come off. Both flies were intact, so I don't know which one it took. I took a good look at them. So I guess possibly it could have been a big salmon, but the way it took in the pool and ran zigzaggedy around the pool made me think it was a mullet, a big mullet. So as you can imagine then, my stomach was retching, I was shaking. Just one of those experiences you're going to get now and again. So that's really given me a good taste. I know I've had mullet before, up to £5. Great fun. But to experience something like this, I want to experience that again. And this time, I'm going to make sure I want to try to get it to stay on. So anyway, that's a story I wanted to tell you. I hope you're catching fish as well. I noticed on Instagram, especially, and some posts on Facebook, so there's some sea trout showing at last. Some rivers seem to be devoid of it, but there's some sort of started to show now in the last couple of days. So hopefully we'll get some action in the next couple of weeks. Moving on to a positive note, I get the great pleasure about meeting many people my guiding and tuition. And I had a client this week, David Armitage, from Ceri, but now living in Wales. And he wanted to touch up his casting and general skills. So I took him to the local lake, and he caught his first trout on a dry fly. And he was over the moon, and he couldn't wait to go back to his local reservoir to try out the new techniques and tactics which he'd learned. And the buzz I get out of that is seeing the enjoyment, somebody who's just experienced it for the first time. He actually had 2 fish and rose many, many more. So if you're new to the sport, or you want to touch up on your tactics and techniques of stillwater fishing, give us a shout. So that leads me on nicely to this week's guest, who also has a passion for dry fly stillwater fishing. I chatted with him in the past, one of the first podcasts. The last time we spoke of his experience of his guiding and pike fishing, but this time we chats more about the fly fishing for trout on chew, the methods, the hatches, and actually something which a lot of people are talking about at the moment is the future of Bristol Reservoirs. So he touches on this and tells us of what he expects to happen and hopes to see in the future for Chew and Blagdon. Welcome to my chat once more with John Horsey. Well, it's good to be back in your manor, John.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Ceri. I haven't seen you since we fished at Blagdon.
I know, and I think that would have been over 20 years, I think, ago.
Sometimes the years go by, you think it's 3 or 4 years, and it's actually 15 years. So.
I know. So we done, as regards Bristol Reservoirs, we done Blagdon, and it only took us 20 years to get together and fish on Chew.
Yeah, well, it's a hot, sunny day today, but there's plenty of fish about, so hopefully we'll get a few fish on Chew.
Yeah, and we're actually sitting in the kitchen at the moment, above Chew Lodge, the staff kitchen.
Yeah, we're highly honoured. Not many people do that.
And one thing I didn't expect, when I was setting this gear up, you were sitting down, and I thought there was a spider crawling on your shoulder, and you knocked it off.
It was a cockabondi.
That's the last thing I expected to see on Chew.
To be honest, that's the first one I've seen here. And we were talking to John Horsey earlier, and he said the last couple of days he's seen a few of these about. So I said, well, I know somebody who will definitely know if it's a cockabondi or not. So I came up and asked you, and it happened to be on my shirt, didn't it?
It was, yeah.
So I picked it up off the floor, and sure enough, it's cockabondi. So I don't even know if the fish know what they are yet, but hopefully, if there's plenty of them.
Well, fair enough. I knew a friend of mine, he went on the weekend up to Clyde Wen with the intention of catching the core catch, and he wasn't there. And I know now why he wasn't there. They down here. They come over the bridge.
Well, a lot of Welsh people come over the bridge to fish on Chew and Blagdon. Maybe the cockabondis followed them.
Yeah, and I guess usually the middle of June they come, and when the beetle's on up the lakes with us, it's so good. It doesn't really matter. Imitate the hatch. You stick a dry hoppers even work. Yeah, because they're up looking, waiting, and they just. I've had trout when you're bringing them into the net, you lift them out, and their bellies are crunching. So much course in it. The surroundings are a lot different, so I wonder where are they coming from here, because I think it's the ferns and the moorland really up with us you get them.
There is a hill just around here called Knoll Hill Tump, and that's covered in ferns.
Right.
And so whether there's plenty on there or not, but apart from that, we haven't got lots of furze, we haven't got lots of moorland around here. It's hills and grass and grazing area, really. But you were saying about the cockabondi, when you get a lot of them on the lakes and the fish are gorging on them, it's exactly the same in Tasmania. They get a thing called a gum beetle, which is a eucalyptus tree beetle. And you can actually catch those when they're on the water. The fish just come and take them off the top. And it's totally pointless trying to imitate a gum beetle. Something like a hopper, red bits, carrot fly, standard stuff here. I've been there, and it catches them so easily. And I think actually something a little bit different that isn't quite the same. When they're looking up, they pick it out. They pick it up and pick it out from the rest of them that they see. And sometimes, you can get 600 or 700 gum beetles in one fish, and they're still eating. Yeah. Amazing thing when they're on them.
Well, I'm really looking forward to, after doing this recording now, to get out on the lake and doing some fishing. Now, this is a second home to you, I guess, isn't it? Because you're guiding most days by the sounds of it.
Yeah, I've been a pro guide now for 29 years. So there seems to be more and more people coming in and becoming guides on different waters. But this is my full-time job. I'm on the water sometimes 7 days a week. When it gets to May and June, it is often, I work the whole month. And thankfully, because the weather conditions are so different day by day, we get different fishing conditions day by day. And this year and the last year and the year before that, on Chew Valley and Blagdon, the fishing has been nothing short of sensational for months and months and months. But what we've got nowadays, we've got warm winters, and the buzzer hatches, instead of starting in sort of May time and going through June and fizzling out in July, they're starting in March. Sometimes you've got them out here when we're doing the pike trials. There's buzzers hatching in February. So our buzzer hatches and our insect activity on our big reservoirs is better than it's ever been. I know our rivers are in decline with insect life, but our lakes are getting better and better and better every year. The only trouble is, if it's anything to do with climate change, which I think it is, everything's happening earlier. So if it starts earlier, it will finish earlier. So now we're getting to a stage in the middle of June when 15 years ago we'd be out there catching fish on buzzers, grenadiers, soldier palmers, that sort of stuff. Those buzzers have mainly gone, so the fish have got to find something else to feed on. So they're grazing a lot of bloodworm off of the weed stalks. They're also, when they're doing that, they're finding hog louse, shrimp, snails, case caddis, all sorts of stuff. There's tiny green buzzers in them, and they shouldn't really be around till July, so they're coming earlier and earlier. So you've got to try and find what depth the fish are feeding at. So you're not going to get that many fish rising out of the blue, but you will get lots of fish that are feeding on nymphs, and the nymph fishing here is fantastic, and the quality of fish is the best I've seen it for years.
I've seen the photographs on social media of some really beautiful looking rainbows, fully finned, and it's been exceptional, and most of them have been on buzzers from what I've heard. But looking at today, thinking about it, it's probably going to be a tough day, isn't it? It's bright sun. We've had about 3 or 4 days of sweltering heat.
Yeah.
And there's a hint of a breeze out there. It might even go in a flat calm. But talking to you earlier on, if it goes flat calm, it looks like you'll be rubbing your hands together because that's your favourite conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a competition fisherman, so I want to get an edge if I can. And the edge quite often is just a flat calm. And the reason I like sun and flat calm is you hardly ever get a flat calm day with cloud. It just doesn't happen. So you're going to get a bright sunny day, you'll get some flat calms. And quite often, any lakes you ever fish anywhere in the southern or northern hemisphere, if it's flat calm, fish rise. And if fish rise, it means they're feeding. Now, you've got to go and catch those fish, which is normally on dry fly. And also the fish that rise then are usually the fish that are residents. They know what real food is. And on the surface tension, there is so much crud out there. There's even little things like seed heads and things. They'll pick up all of that. They'll pick up all the empty buzzer shucks, anything. And the longer it's flat calm, the more confidence they have moving on the top, and the more you can go out and target them on dries. It also means that a lot of the other methods don't work. So there's nobody going to be rushing around and finding a corner with a load of stockies that they can pull out on blobs and fabs, because it ain't going to happen. So you've got to go out, take your time, try and build a good bag of fish. On Sunday, we had a competition here that was organised by Blagdon Fly Fishers, and there were 26 people fishing in that, and it was sunny, but it was breezy as well. There was a breeze, so there was no fish rising, because you won't get fish rising sun and wind. End of story. You don't get a hatch in sun and wind, so you can forget the dries then. But then we were after them with nymphs, and it was actually one with 8 fish, which to me is a perfect match result, because that's the normal limit on most of our fisheries. And we're getting used to getting these numbers of 25 fish, 35 fish, or we had 50 to the boat. It's an unsustainable approach to fly fishing, trying to catch that many fish and actually catching that many. Because when things get difficult and the water temperature rises and the weed grows and the hatches drop off, you are not going to catch that many fish. It just won't happen. Yeah. But people are expecting it all the time now. And it makes it really difficult for the fisheries, because these guys then, because they're only catching 1 or 2 or maybe nothing, because they've got 1 or 2 lines of attack, and if they don't work, they're absolutely scuppered. They then start bad-mouthing the fishery and saying the fishery isn't any good on social media, where in actual fact, they ought to be looking closer to home, which is themselves. And if I'm in a match and somebody catches 8 or 10 fish and I've only caught a couple, then the only person to blame is me. Because if he can catch 8 or 10, I should be able to catch 8 and 10. And that's the way I approach all my fishing. And as a funny thing was, the guy who won at Graham Curry on Sunday, he had 8 fish, which was a great bag. We had another guy, Nick Long, had 7. I had 6, and I can tell you by watching for my takes all day and concentrating all day, I had 7 takes that day. I hooked all 7. It was on barbless hooks. I lost 1, I landed 6. and on barbless hooks with fish that are 4.5 pounds jumping out the water and that's not a bad return on barbless.
Yeah.
But fantastic fish and a great match. So that's what we want. And contrary to public belief, we don't want 20 or 30 fish because that's too easy. Anybody can get those. There's a lot of good anglers out there nowadays.
That's one of the reasons I disappeared from the competition scene, because you're there, you're tacking up, and come 10 o'clock, you get out on the lake, and sometimes by 11 o'clock you've had your fish and you've got to sit in a boat then, without just time bonuses. And I thought, I'm getting bored of this. And if you weren't in the spot where the stockfish were, you could be hunting around, and then you might fish for 3-4 hours, and you have maybe 2 or 3 good fish. And then you come around the corner, and you'll see somebody, they've been sitting there since 11 o'clock, and they've had their fish. And I thought, if this is competition fishing, I've had enough of it. And I think it wasn't necessarily anything to do with the anglers. The thing is, whatever reservoir you're on, like at the time was the local waters, Llandegfydd, what was happening, leading up to it, you were having your practice days and you were having some good fish, maybe 4 fish, 5 fish, maybe even better. And on the day of the competition then, they put a tump of fish in, and it was a farce because they wanted the figures in the press. There was 400 fish caught, 250 fish caught. And I thought, I prefer to work hard and have 4 fish in a competition.
I'm 100% behind you on that. And I think most serious competition anglers are as well. I run competitions. I've been running the biggest competitions for years. We gave away Lexus cars, for goodness sake. No one's ever done anything like that in any fly fishing competition ever, and probably never will again. Now we give away big holidays and we give away a lot of tackle. So the prizes are great, but because of that, what I don't want is the fisheries to actually stock for a competition. So I actually asked the fisheries if it's possible, please don't stock within a couple of weeks of any competition, because anybody's put any work in and put some practice in, that'll all be ruined, as you say, by the introduction of a load of stockfish. Yeah. And the competitors, trust me, don't want it either, because it just means that they've wasted their time trying to find out how the fish are feeding, what happens in weather changes, what flies are working, what depth they're feeding. It all goes out the window if you put a load of stockies in. So most of the time now, the fisheries are very good. They don't do that, and they're not interested in the numbers like that. We just want a good, fair competition. The other thing we do is we don't do many fish kill now. So I'll drop down the fish kill to, say, 2 or 3 fish, and then unlimited catch and release using debarbed or barbless hooks. And every fish that's released counts as whatever the average weight of the fish is in the lake at that time. So you get a real result based on the total number of fish that are caught, which is the fairest way of doing things, and also means that you fish for the full 8 hours, whatever happens. And the competition we had the other day was all catch and release. So you just mark the time that you caught your first fish, you mark the time that you catch your 4th fish, and then it's just total numbers. So if there's a tie on numbers, then it's the person who caught his first fish. And if there's a tie on numbers and the person who caught his first fish, the 4th fish comes into play. Right. And you never get a tie in both. So these fish are going back. And I think one of the reasons why we are getting slightly better overwintered rainbows nowadays is because there physically are more fish in the lake. And there's absolutely no doubt whatsoever that catch and release works. And the one thing that is for sure, if you hit that fish on the head, he isn't going to come back, and it's not going to survive. It's going to be in your bass bag. And people a lot of the time don't want trout, so they're putting them back. And they're a very expensive resource anyway. So put them back, and they will survive. And most of the time, I think when the fish are really feeding, they might even take a fly again on the same day even, when they're really gorging. But maybe it'll take a couple of days for them to get over it. The truth is we don't really know how long it takes them. But they do survive.
Is the Cortland event fully booked this year?
Yeah, the team event for the first time ever was oversubscribed before the season even started.
That's it.
And we've got 2 teams in reserve as well. So we've got 40 boats here on Chew Valley Lake. We've got 20 boats on Blagden. It's a 2-day event, and there'll be 2 days of practice as well. So in effect, that's 60 boats booked for 4 days on the trot. People are coming from around the country, so they've booked their accommodation around here as well. So the pubs are full and the restaurants will be full. So everybody joins in, if you like, and gets a benefit of these big competitions on the lake. So, yeah, we're really pleased with that. So we're hoping for a great couple of days fishing. And so we have 2 of the team of 6 fishing on Blagden, and then 4 of the team of 6 fishing on Chew. and then we do a weigh-in at Blagden, then we come over here and weigh in at Chew, and then we consolidate the results.
Did they fish, say the team who fished on the one day on Chew, did they fish Blagden the next day?
No, we ask people to nominate their 2 Blagden anglers, and they stay on Blagden, which means they can practice on Blagden. Otherwise, if you're changing people, it means they've got to have even more days practice, which costs them a lot more money as well and a lot more time. So, we're aware that a 2-day competition takes a lot of time and it's pretty expensive as well for people. But in big competitions, if you're going to fish these major events, it is going to cost you a bit of money. But we love it so much, competition fly fishing, that we're prepared to do that.
Yeah. Well, going back to today now and the weather conditions and this time of year generally, you were saying that some of these fish will have been feeding this morning at 3:30 or so.
Yeah, when I used to work for the generating board, going back goodness knows how many years, I wasn't very keen on my job, to be perfectly honest. So I would have at least 2 days early morning fishing before I went to work. So I'd get up in the middle of summer like it is at the moment. The alarm would be set for 3 o'clock, and I would get out of bed in the dark. And if I could hear that there was no wind around, I'd be in the car and I'd be off to Wick Green or maybe over to Blagden to fish. If it was windy, I'd get back into bed because you don't get a hatch on a windy morning. So that's the end of it. But I would fish then from, say, 3:30 through to 7:30. And then I'd be in work by 8. I'd be asleep at my desk by 12 o'clock. Yeah. But you could often have fantastic fishing casting into the dark from the bank, never bother to wade first thing in the morning because the fish have got no fear. They come right into the shoreline, so there's hardly ever anybody else there, and they feed really hard, and there's often brilliant hatches first thing in the morning. By the time the sun's really up, say by 6 o'clock, there's other anglers turning up. You might have had half a dozen fish, but it's finished. Yeah. That's it. And those fish, you can see them physically move out, and they move out and then they go off. And that's when you need your boats ready to go and catch those fish. And then later on in the evening, they might come back on. And I've been told by a lot of anglers here at the moment on Chew that from 7:30, 8:30 through to nearly 10 o'clock, there's a massive hatch in the evening and fish are feeding really well. So it's hot weather. It stops them feeding. The main reason it stops them feeding is because it stops the hatch. So if there's no hatch on a very rich, fertile lake like Chew or Blagden, then the fish will just rest. And anybody who says all that trout do is live to eat and breed is ridiculous. What about resting? Everything on earth rests. And when it's not right, when the conditions aren't right for these hatch-driven lakes like Chew and Blagden, they will rest and they won't feed. And that's when you've got to try and prize 1 or 2 fish out in a competition. But when they feed, they'll all turn on at the same time, which is quite amazing.
Yeah. We are now in the middle of June, and you said the buzzer fishing, probably the main buzzer fishing we've seen the best of. Now, what would you expect to be happening this evening then?
Well, there could be some buzzers hatching because we've seen some big rafts of buzzer shucks in the mornings here. So there's got to be some buzzers hatching. So there's still some buzzers hatching, but they're hatching in the cool evenings probably. Or they're hatching at 3 o'clock in the morning, which is probably more likely. So that's when the big hatches, having fished a lot of early mornings and late evenings, the early morning buzzer hatches are always better than the late evening ones. It's just that people are never normally around to see it. Yeah. And anglers nowadays want to turn up, park their car, get out, walk 2 yards and fish. Yeah. In the past, we were trying lots of different areas and there were a lot of bank anglers who were very good as well. And we used to find out what was going on. Then we'd share the information. In fact, what you could do is see somebody's car. And if that was parked in a certain spot, you knew there was some fish there. So you get over and join them, even if it's first thing in the morning. But at the moment, I would expect them to be feeding a little bit deeper, not stupidly deep. There's no reason in hot, sunny weather for fish to go deep. It's a popular adage that is totally incorrect. When people talk about it sunny, people say, oh, yeah, because the Daphnia goes deep. Well, I used to catch Daphnia from my uncle's tropical fish, and on hot, sunny weather, the Daphnia comes up to the warmest water, always. And that's the easiest to catch. So why would they go deep? Rubbish. People just say it, and they have no experience of it, but they actually just accept that's the norm. Yeah. Another thing, when the wind's in the east, the fish bite the least. What a load of rubbish. We're in the southwest of England. Easterly winds blow across the country. They're blown out and they're warm by the time they get here. My hated wind is a southwesterly or a westerly. Blows straight across the Atlantic, straight across the Irish Sea, and straight up Chew Valley Lake. Horrible. Absolutely horrible.
Yeah,
always.
Right?
Hate it.
I love a westerly or southwesterly, but after all being said, I don't mind any wind unless as long as it's consistent. You have a couple of days of a northerly, a couple of days of easterly, the fish get into routine, don't they?
Yeah, they certainly do.
It's carp anglers taught me that years ago, and they were a couple of carp anglers, and they say, even in winter, you get these easterlies, and they're catching. You'll have one day easterly, another day a northerly, then it's difficult. But as soon as you get some consistency, fish come on.
Yeah.
Maybe by the looks of it, the trout are the same.
Oh, they definitely are. And the other thing is as well, with changes of air pressure, will change the fishing. And you can get changes in air pressure in a day. And you can sometimes be out there and it's great conditions. It's overcast, light breeze, warm, and you can't catch. Yeah. 2 days later, you get a thunderstorm and you think, that was it. They pick it up way, way quicker than we do. But my question is, if there's a change in air pressure, what happens in the water? Because you cannot compress water. It's a physical impossibility. So a change in air pressure cannot change your water pressure. The only way you can change water pressure is in a pressure vessel. So I've had this discussion with a lot of scientists, and none of us know the answer. Everyone's got their theories. My theory is that it doesn't actually affect the fish, but it affects the insects. And I think that they know before the fish do. And when the insects are active, then the fish are active. And when the insects aren't, the fish aren't. They just rest.
That explains, because after a thunderstorm, so many times the fishing comes good.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it clears the air, maybe the insects then.
Yeah. And you can feel it sometimes when you're out there. You've got a warm, muggy day, and suddenly it just feels fresher, and the fish start feeding. Now, there's no way that a fish that's swimming 6 foot down is going to know that that air is fresher.
No way. Right, yeah.
So what is it, But the thing is, the main thing is you've just got to adjust, and you've got to be waiting for those things. And a lot of chew anglers over the years, when you watch them fishing, they're always looking over their shoulder, looking up, looking for a cloud. Because the difference between catching and not catching very often here is cloud or no cloud. So if you've got wind and sun, it's going to be difficult. Whatever you go out, I can tell you, it's going to be difficult.
Yeah.
But when you've got cloud and wind, that's your easiest conditions. So if we're going to get a sunny day, I always want it with no wind, flat calm, because fish feed in flat calms. Yeah. Fish love flat calms, fishermen don't. So I want to fish when the fish want it and love it, not when the anglers do.
We were speaking earlier on when we were having breakfast. A boy was out of breakfast, wasn't it?
Yes, great, wasn't it?
Pancakes. I'm going to have to have that again, actually.
Yeah, I was on the healthy option of smashed avocado and poached egg.
I'm still full now, to be honest. But when we were having the breakfast, we were talking about, a lot of people have been speaking about the uncertainty of what's going on with Bristol Reservoirs. You pointed out some of your thoughts on it. Do you want to share with some information on that?
Well, what's actually happened at the moment is Bristol Water wanted somebody else to take on the fishing from them. And so there were actually 4 bids that were entered into the bidding process. And the group that have got the preferred bidder status is South West Lakes Trust. And South West Water 7 years ago did the same thing that Bristol Water are doing now. So they sort of didn't want to run their fisheries and their water parks, etc. So South West Lakes Trust was set up to actually run those waters on their behalf. And they also run the royalty fishery, which was part of Bournemouth Water. So South West Lakes Trust are now taking over the fishing at Chew and Blagden. But it's a bigger picture than that. It's Chew Valley Lake, Blagden Lake, Barrows 1, 2 and 3, Lytton Upper and Lower, Chew Magna Reservoir, Cheddar Reservoir, the River Yeo and the River Chew. So that's 11 different waters. Now, there's nobody in this country that's got responsibility of more than 3, and that's Ivor Jones. So this group now has to take on the fishing at all of those venues. And it's a bigger picture as well, but we can't go too much into detail on that. But now that South West Lakes Trust are just about in the situation where they're going to be running the fishery, and we don't quite know when that's going to start, but it could be fairly soon. I think it's great news that they're going to continue with the fishing, which is the scary thing for us, which is why Jacob Rees-Mogg was involved some years ago when Bristol Water were proposing to do the same thing and close Chew and Blagden as viable fisheries. So
he's from this area, isn't he?
Yeah, he's the Conservative MP for this area.
All right.
So very high profile guy,
I like him. I love listening to his
whatever
YouTube
your political persuasion. Yeah. Well, he was very supportive of keeping the fishing going because there's more to fishing, and the water companies that make their money from selling water is one thing, but there's a history with our fishing lakes. So Blagden was opened in 1902. Chew was opened in 1956 by the Queen. It was the biggest man-made reservoir in Europe at the time. So there's history there.
Yeah.
But the trouble is a lot of these water companies are now owned by private equity companies who aren't really interested in the history and the legacy. I want my kids and my kids' kids and my kids' kids' kids to be able to fish on Chew and Blagden in the future, and I don't want them to lose them. So South West Lakes Trust have now been given the preferred bidder status, so as long as everything goes according to plan, they will be running the fishing here. So we'll all try and get behind them as much as possible and hope that they make a really good job of running the fishing.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, Chew is the most important fishery in this country. It's very much a hatch-driven lake, and for anglers that want to represent the country, etc., you've got to be versatile at all methods of fishing. And I can say from having done it, having been invited to give clinics in places like Australia, New Zealand, Tasmania, America, Canada, Italy, I've actually gone to all those places and done the same thing that I do here and been able to show those guys how to improve their fishing techniques.
Yeah.
Because a lot of places in the world have got great fishing, but the anglers are nowhere near as good as our anglers.
Going on to the fishing, what's expected the rest of the season then? For somebody who maybe haven't fished it too many times or haven't fished it for a while, what are the hatches that you can expect to have on the sport, or maybe areas even, you would expect to be happening on Chew, sort of month on month, say in July, August, September?
Right, that's a difficult one because it's all weather dependent. So everything we do in fishing, the biggest player in our fishing conditions and whether we catch fish is the weather. So that's the key thing. You aren't going to get certain hatches if the weather isn't right. Just won't happen.
Do you get good daddies?
We get loads of daddies and fish don't eat them.
Don't they?
No, not interested.
What about fry then?
I haven't spooned a daddy or a fry of any description out of a Chew Valley or Blagden trout for probably 8 years.
Is it?
Or more. So they're not really onto that. We get loads of fry because we've got a load of perch and a load of roach in Chew. In Blagden, there's only perch. So they could eat them, but they rarely do.
Yeah.
The pike feed primarily on the roach and perch. So it's great food for them because the pike aren't that interested in the trout. So they're after the perch and the roach. So really, you're looking at Corixa being a real major food form for, say, August onwards. It used to be September, October onwards, but we're spooning Corixa out of fish in March now, so they're not dying off in the winter months, that sort of thing. We will get more buzzers, and they'll come in as sort of grey buzzers in probably September, October time. That's a fantastic time for dries now, because another thing we don't get is autumn winds anymore. They've gone. So we'll have loads of dry fly fishing later. And with Corixa as well, you'll catch Corixa feeders over the weed beds, and you catch those on dries or on washing line. So it's all great. You get big follows from fish that are chasing the Corixa around.
Do you get, for instance, on Rutland especially, you get September, October, the fish it in the shoals of the roach fry at the end of the year? Do you get them?
Right.
You used to have them, didn't you?
We used to get them, and we used to get normally along here on Woodford Bank.
Yeah.
All the way along there you get fry feeders. But although we get millions of perch, we rarely get the trout after them at all. And another thing about Rutland, which brought back memories of when I fished in the National a few years ago at Rutland. I was told by all the locals that the fish are all fry feeding along the Finch's Bank, off the weed beds, and anywhere there's weed beds, they're on the fry. So I went up there practicing for 3 days for the National, and I spooned my fish. And I never spooned a single fry out of any fish in 5 days. They're on Corixa. And these guys see them taking Corixa and chasing around, and they think they're on fry, and they're not on fry at all. So people were using fry patterns. And it was one of those, thankfully, it was one of the matches I won. Actually, that's going back some years ago. And I fished dries. I fished 3 hoppers at the top of mountain and caught 8 on the first day and 8 on the second day. So I was first on the first day, third on the second. So I came 4th overall in 4 place points. And so I was national champion up there. And that was on dries. And there was 2 8-hour matches, and I fished for less than 8 hours in both days because the fish were, to be perfectly honest, pretty easy at the top of mountain. And we had it to ourselves. Most of the people were still looking for where the stockfish were or catching fish on washing line and that sort of stuff.
Do you ever fish for pleasure now? Because you're out as much as you are now guiding and tuition. Do you actually go out yourself sometime?
I'll sometimes go out with friends just for a day's fishing. I don't normally enter the local comps because I'm running competitions most weekends all over the country, running the Anglers World Comp or the Cortland competition. But this year, because it's been so strange and because of the pandemic last year, and I hardly worked at all because my wife's high risk, so I didn't want to sort of catch it and then give her COVID. So I didn't work very much. But this year I've been out more. So I do a bit of pleasure fishing. But to be perfectly honest, because I could be out 7 days a week, then if I do get a day off, I'll probably end up going shopping at Bristol Village or something like that.
What about the bank? Do you ever bank fish these days?
I haven't bank fished for a few years now. I used to have a season ticket to fish the banks, and that's where I learnt my fishing. From a lot of good anglers, a lot of good local anglers, the likes of John Braithwaite and Les Toogood and Jeff Marshall, who sadly died now, and these sort of guys. They were really keen anglers, but we've all moved on to boat fishing.
Yeah.
And bank fishing has got easier without a doubt, because there are more fish in all our reservoirs now than there's ever been. And there's more likelihood of catching them during the day than there's ever been. But years ago, when I had season tickets to fish the bank, I would fish the early mornings and I'd do the evenings. And sometimes I'd be there and have the day off, say on a Saturday or Sunday, be there at 4 o'clock in the morning. We'd catch a few fish. Then we'd fish all day for nothing. But then we knew that the evening you got a chance of catching a few again.
Yeah.
But those days have gone, because people now want instant gratification, plenty of fish. It's put a massive pressure on the fisheries, all the fisheries, to keep up with the rest of the fisheries. So if you've got some fisheries in the country that are easier than others, because we're in the southwest, so we're affected by winds and that an awful lot. When you get up to places like the Midlands, right in the middle of the country, you've got places like Draycott, which are always been good fisheries, but they don't get affected by the winds like we do.
Yeah.
They don't get drawn down usually as much as we do. And the fishing's really consistent, and it's great fishing. But, you know, with social media now, people can look and see where there's fishing well at the moment, and they can get in a car and just clear off and fish it.
I'm thoroughly enjoying my bank fishing now, because it's the first year in a long time I haven't got leaky waders. I've got a new pair of waders by Vision, actually, and touch wood, so far they're beautiful, and I love it again, because like yourself, you're fishing boats all the time, and then it's nice, something special about wading out in the evening up to your waist, and you know, just being in the middle of a lake, like, you know, I love it. And I'll be doing a lot more of it as well. And in fact, I haven't fished Blagden for many years, but it's something, when I was driving here now today, I'm going to definitely change. I'm going to just have a few more days on Blagden.
Blagden is great. Blagden is a much better bank fishery than Chew. And the main reason for that is you can fish just about all of Blagden. Chew Valley Lake, a lot of it is so reed covered now, a lot of it is actually a nature reserve. So if you can get onto Woodford Bank or Nunnery Point or the North Shore, or Wick Green, that's your main areas now. So when the levels drop, it opens up those areas in front of the reeds, so you can fish an awful lot more of it.
Yeah.
But on both lakes, Chew and Blagden, the weed growth this year is pretty heavy. And because it's growing so early, you know, we've got a lot of weed. It's going to make the bank fishing a bit tough.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to wait until the levels drop a little bit for the bank anglers to have a really good time.
One of my earliest fond memories of Chew, we used to always come down for opening day. And we used to be sitting in the car, you know, it was like 6 o'clock in the morning, waiting. Yeah. And we wouldn't be the first ones at that time. There'd be queues waiting to come in from the gate. And then as soon as the light appeared, you could see all these nets. Somebody had already been down. Yeah. These Bob Church wading nets, I think they were. And it was like the Germans putting the towels in the deck chairs. So do many people bank fish like they used to? Years ago, there used to be loads of people bank fishing.
I'm with you, because I did exactly the same. I slept in my car from 2 o'clock in the morning on the North Shore at Blagden.
That's it.
About 10th in line.
Yeah.
And then they'd open the gates at 6 o'clock in the morning, but you weren't allowed to fish till 7. So you'd have to rush to your place and maybe run down and put a net in the water. But all the best places were gone by then anyway.
Yeah.
But nowadays, there's nowhere near the number of people that bank fish, but there's an awful lot more people boat fish.
Yeah.
So it's a shame, really, because bank fishing, although there was a bit of a return last year to an increase in bank fishing from people that hadn't fished for years. Because of the pandemic, they were home. And because the Angling Trust did a great job of opening up fishing again for people, people started fishing on the bank because they could socially distance on the bank. And it became pretty popular again. So I could see that it doesn't need too much to get anglers back. But the one thing that people want still is catching those fish. And it does mean that the stocking levels need to be fairly high on the lakes. And if you have got weed growth, it's very difficult. Those fish won't come in over the weed. That's the thing. Yeah. So you could cut trenches out like you do for coarse fishing, but they won't swim up them. They'll stay outside. Yeah. So it's a matter of trying to choose your areas where there's slightly deeper water, where there's no weed growth, and fish it like that. But at the moment on Blagden, for example, the fish are feeding on damsels like crazy. Now, going back probably as little as 6 years ago, you could fish Blagden and I could spoon every fish I catch and never get a damsel in any of them. But I think because we haven't got
the
buzzers,
nymph or the adult?
The nymphs, they don't take the adults still, very, very, very rarely.
Yeah.
So the nymphs are prolific. You know, you can look down by the boat sometimes, and an inch under the water, you can see 5 or 6 swimming through in 1 square metre. So there's loads of them. And the trout are starting to feed on them. And I think it's because there's not so many buzzers now, they've had to turn on to something else. And because our damsel populations are getting bigger and bigger, they're swimming across the weed to hatch out on dry land. Yeah. And these trout are going nuts for them. And I'll tell you what, you can cast at fish after fish after fish with these damsel feeders. So not easy, but my God, is it great fun.
Yeah. Well, my challenge for today, for you and me, is to try and catch a fish in a cork.
Yeah, well, that's going to be a challenge. But wouldn't it be amazing if we did?
I know. I can definitely give it a try. If you see any fish moving, anyway, I'll definitely have to put a dry cork on.
The funny thing is, there's been a couple of splashy fish recently in amongst the rest of the fish, because when you've got buzzer feeding fish, they usually come up in the water, they'll sip, and they'll move on, they'll sip, and they'll move on, and they'll sip. Then you've got to cover them accurately with dries to catch them. But normally when they're on beetles and things like that, it's
splash.
Splash.
Yeah.
It's exactly right. So you'd know that. And also going to places like Brennig, where you've got the red legs, the heatherfly, they splash at those, and you know damn well they're on them then. Yeah. So if you put on a bibio hopper or something like that, you're going to catch on those. A lot of the guys use CDCs up there, but I'm not a great lover of CDCs. But like you said earlier,
don't you?
Nah, not on lakes. Get too many refusals.
Right.
Far too many. I mean, I dry fly fish an awful lot, and I would back myself to fish dries against anyone in the world, anytime, on still waters. But I've used a lot of dries over the years, an awful lot. And I've put on, the time to practice with new stuff is when the fishing's good. Most people only put on their new patterns when the fishing's crap, basically. Yeah. So when it's good, when the fish are really on, change. Change from, say, a hopper, bob's bits and a carrot fly, and put some CDCs on. And see how many refusals you get. You'll be amazed how many fish come up and turn away at the last second. It looks like they've taken them, but they don't. So if you're in a match like I was on Sunday, where I got 7 takes all day, you don't want 6 of those to be refusals. You don't want any of them to be refusals. Yeah. And for me, I'm always looking at the worst case scenario. So when it comes to match day, people have practiced. Fish have been caught. They've seen it all. That's the time when your hoppers, bob's bits and carrot flies always come to the fore. And the other stuff, the bigger stuff like big reds and Midas and stuff that have got masses of dressing on them, they'll catch the easy fish, but they're not so good on the difficult fish.
Yeah.
I'm quite happy for people to carry on using them. Fine. Because when it gets to match day, then you'll know what the difference is.
Yeah.
But it's not for me. And I've tried all these patterns in the past. Most of them I've tried years ago. And things like CDCs, I know there's a time, I know there's a place, but I've never found the time and I've never yet found the place. If I was fishing on an iris lock, someone like Sheeling with a load of olives, I'd put CDC on because it's the right profile. But the profile's wrong in my opinion.
You've seen about Sheeling, that's all I've seen on Facebook lately. He's fishing his socks off.
Fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah, I can't wait to get back over there.
And the thing is, if people haven't fished Chew and Blagden for a few years, come over and fish them, because I can tell you, at the moment, we'll see what we're going to do this afternoon, and we're not expecting to sort of knock out loads of fish, but we will catch, but they'll be quality fish. Yeah. And they are, there's not many places in the country where these fish will carry on feeding, because you need reservoirs with a lot of food in them. And that's one of the things that Chew has got going for it and Blagden has got going for it. And the guys here have done a great job of trying to keep the fish quality.
Yeah. And one good thing I can say about Chew, it's always had staff who are fishermen. And you've got like John Harris and Lee Sennington here now. Yep. They know they're fishing.
Yep.
And they can guide you and tell you where to go and what. We were waiting. There's people coming in and they were telling them, and they're all years, Fair play to the boys. Like, they're running a great ship,
Yeah,
so long will it continue.
Absolutely, yeah. And with Southwest Lakes Trust sort of taking the helm now, hopefully, things will improve. What we want things to do is to get better, and we don't want things to drop off, because there's a standard that's been set by Bristol Water over the years with the quality of their fish, that they rear their own fish. The quality of the rainbows are great. They've got fantastic browns here still. We were talking about big brownies. The biggest brownie caught here is 22.5 pounds. So that's a ferox grown on fish. And they stock browns still. But in this sort of weather, you're not going to see the browns.
Yeah.
It's your rainbows that are really going to bail you out.
Oh, there's a challenge.
Yeah. Let's see how we do.
Corks and browns.
Oh, Rocky, now you've
Always expect the unexpected, they say, don't they?
Yeah, that's right. And you just don't know. I mean, we could end up catching a 4 or 5 pound perch. Who knows?
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah.
Well, many thanks for the chat. And I think it's time looking up in the lake now. We need to get out there.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ceri. Let's go and catch a few.
Cheers, John. If this is your first time tuning in, make sure you catch all future episodes by clicking subscribe via the links on my website, castingwithcerijones.com, or via iTunes or your favourite podcatcher. If you like what you've heard on this episode, feel free to drop me a line via my website. Tell me what you've enjoyed, ask a question, or better yet, tell me what you want to hear more of in the future. And if you're looking for additional tips, tackle reviews or venue information, or just want to see what's been hit in the back of my net lately, search up Casting with Ceri Jones on Facebook or follow me on Instagram. And if you still want more, I'm regularly uploading video content onto the Casting with Ceri Jones YouTube channel, so just check that out and subscribe over there too. Wherever you follow, subscribe, comment or message, I look forward to catching up soon for a good fishing chat. Well, I think that's all for now. So until next time, tight lines and don't strike too soon.